But welcome everybody to this next session brought to you by Amplify. This session is an awesome one. It is a much needed, long overdue session. But you know what? It's gonna be a difficult one. This session is for us to grow as an ecosystem, to learn from our past mistakes, but to keep it positive, learn from our past opportunities missed. But it's still an opportunity for us to improve in the future. A couple of key rules for this session is be positive. Number one, be positive always. This is a constructive learning environment. No reason to bash Louisville too hard, but we want you to be difficult on us, our panelists. Be as strong as you can with still leaving room for us to learn from. And another one, especially in the chat, no name calling. I know my panelists have already been alerted, but no, let's not point out anyone in particular. We've all had our mistakes in the past. We've all learned from our past, but there's no reason to highlight anyone in particular at the moment. We've all signed, if you haven't signed our pledge yet from Amplify, we have this give first mentality, but we've got this pledge that is how to be the best ecosystem member that you can be. Larry can help you out with that one if you haven't seen it before. But if you want to follow along with our panelists, great work. I've posted their LinkedIns in the chat, as well as the Amplify Louisville website, so you can follow along with our newsletter for other great events, as well as the news from our ecosystem, as well as the wins to celebrate. So again, this session is called The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, an opportunity for us to learn from the entrepreneurs that had to leave in order to find success. But we are brought here today. We're joined by Taylor Trusty, Alex Frommeyer, and Rob May, and our lovely moderator, Allie Trutman, who was requested, by the way. She was requested by our panelists to be the moderator. And so I will pass the mic, and Allie, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you guys. And thanks for asking me. This is a conversation, way to rub it in, Mikey. We all love you, Zach. We love you, Zach. We miss you, petting you, pretty bird. You know, this is, I think, as Mikey said, a long overdue conversation. I'm so happy to be the moderator because I feel like you guys who know me know that I don't get embarrassed about anything. And when you've worked in the field of autism for as long as I have, and then switched over to talking about bodily fluids and bed sheets, I mean, there is nothing that won't come out of my mouth that I feel uncomfortable talking about. So I think I'm the perfect person for the job. I'm not going to talk too much other than doing a little brief intro or asking you guys to do a 1 or 2 sentence intro before we jump into the questions. Folks have submitted questions to us prior to our meeting today. So I have a list of those. We'll do a couple that are to the group, and then I have a couple that are very guided or pointed questions. You know, Rob, we're going to ask you about some investment things and things like that. So if you guys wouldn't mind just a 1 or 2 sentence update on what you're doing and what you were doing while you were in Louisville, that would be great. I know we want to dive into the questions, so I'll just go to my right. Taylor, do you want to go ahead and start?
Sure. My name's Taylor Trusty. I was born in Louisville, ran a digital marketing agency in Louisville for 12 years, moved to New York in 2016, sold the agency. Now I run, co-founded a software company called Signal Insights.
Wonderful, thanks. Rob, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so I'm Rob May. I grew up in Louisville, went to Manual High School, went to University of Kentucky. I actually lived in Florida for a while and then came back to Louisville in the mid 2000s and co-founded a company called Backupify. We moved to Boston in 2010, raised $22 million and sold that company in 2014. I started a company called Tala. Tala's still running. It didn't do as well as Backupify. But in the time that I ran Tala, I made 74 angel investments personally, all over the country and actually all over the world. A couple of them are international. And so last year in October, I left Tala, hired a CEO, and joined a venture firm here in Boston called PJC. It's a $100 million early stage fund. My focus is AI and robotics. The investments I've done here have been all over the country. So I have companies in LA and San Francisco and Colorado and also in Boston.
Wonderful, thanks. And Santa?
Hello, everyone. Santa today. Alex Frohmeyer, founder and CEO of Beam Dental, not from Louisville, grew up in Northern Kentucky in my case, but went to U of L, the Speed School for engineering, met my co-founders there. We actually did two businesses. The first was like an engineering consultancy. We started as undergrads. That was called Uproar Labs. We ran that from 2010 to 2012, I think, founded Beam Dental with a specific focus on innovation in the dental and dental insurance industry in 2012. Started with the first connected toothbrush. That's how many folks in Louisville first met me or met the company. Seed funding came in Louisville, Series A and beyond in Columbus, Ohio, where I'm based now. So we moved in 2014, moved the business, and it's still very early stages. Today, we in 42 states around the country are a dental insurance provider for businesses large and small. So we're working with over 5,000 companies all over the US, raised around $90 million of aggregate venture capital from Drive Capital, who was a big catalyst for us to be in Ohio, Kleiner Perkins, Georgian Partners, and a handful of other top venture investors from around the world. Great to be here.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. So I think one of the number one reasons why we all are very familiar with you guys and your stories are because you are, Louisville's heroes. You're our success stories. And I think one of the ugly things about Louisville right now, we're just going to start saying it like that, is why are our success stories not in Louisville anymore? Right? So we have a lot of great things going on in this city. We have an amazing region, actually, that is full of founders, innovators, smart people. Everybody on this call, I bet the participants on this call, they've got something amazing going on. And why are we not calling them success stories? So why don't we just, Alex, you touched on it a little bit, but I know a lot of you guys moved or relocated your companies because of money. So why don't we touch on why you're not in Louisville anymore? And in addition to the money conversation, why not Louisville, right? And why would that have not been a success story to stay here? So Alex, do you want to go back just and talk a little bit about Drive in Columbus?
Yeah, happy to expand a little bit. And first thing I'd say that's actually, Taylor and Rob are both in much bigger cities than Louisville today, but Columbus really isn't. It is a bit larger than Louisville, but very similar in size. Kind of mid-sized, Midwestern, middle of the country city. So I've got, I think, a really good, analogous startup market to compare to. And what I would absolutely say has been true in my experience is that Louisville has exceptional founder DNA. For the size of city that it is. So I don't think what plagues Louisville today from an expansion perspective is the lack of that founder DNA. Many cities have that problem. They just don't have the people starting the companies that can figure out how to scale them. It's other factors, but of course it takes more than just one thing. It's more than just the founders to be able to take businesses from that 0 to 1 stage, but then also 1 to infinity as well, which is I think exactly what we're going to be talking about. In Beam's case, we saw the opportunity because of access to capital, specifically being Drive Capital, which is now they have over $1 billion under assets under management, a venture capital firm that has an entire thesis about investing in underserved capital markets, mostly in the middle of the country, specifically the Midwest. So Drive Capital was founded by 2 former Sequoia partners who moved from the Bay Area to Ohio to invest in companies in cities like Columbus, Pittsburgh, Chicago, Minneapolis, et cetera. And that's been a really successful thesis. So already multiple multi-billion-dollar exits in a fund that was just founded in 2013, proof positive that the companies are here. There are incredible businesses and incredible technologies being developed in places that you don't think of first, like San Francisco, like Seattle, like New York, like Boston. And so that's been a big proof point. I think from my perspective, what really attracted us to wanting to take the company to Ohio was the density of resources available to us because of the capital in a very literal sense, but also because of the resources surrounding that capital for follow-on funding, so expansion or growth stage equity, and the density of talent that comes from a city even similar to the size of Louisville, but when attached to one of the largest 2 or 3 universities in the country, like Ohio State, is spinning out engineers and digital talent at a rate that is tough to not see once you're here. And so we really saw the opportunity to build teams and access additional capital as key reasons why we wanted to make the move.
Love it. That's awesome. Thank you. Rob, same question to you. So we know obviously you had a financial story, but you want to talk a little bit more about how Backupify and you moved over into the Boston area.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that when First Round Capital led our seed round back in January of 2010, they actually didn't have, I mean, we were still based in Louisville, and they actually didn't care. They sort of said like, hey, you should probably go somewhere else where there's a deeper talent pool, but we don't really care where. And so we interviewed CTO candidates in San Francisco and New York and Boston. We found our CTO in Boston, which is why we moved there, or here, I should say. You know, but I think a lot of what people miss in terms of why we have to move, you know, there's a lot of startup ideas that are very counterintuitive to traditional sort of the kinds of ways you would run a business in if you were, you know, went to MBA school or whatever. And there's not a lot of people that know those, the ways to do those. And you can figure it out, and some people can get lucky and some people are smart enough. But, you know, you come to a place like Boston or New York, or you go to the Bay Area, and there's hundreds of people that have taken an engineering team from, 8 people to 45 people in a year. Now, when people normally do that for the first time, right, you're a founder and you think, man, I have 8 engineers. If I can go to 16, I'm going to be so much more productive. You're not. What's going to happen is they're going to be a drag on your existing engineers. It's going to be very slow. And so then you have this thing of like, I doubled my engineering team and I'm getting like a third of the output that I was getting with 8 guys. Like, what happens?
Yeah.
And when you try to put in, management best practices when you've been through GE's management program, like it's not what you have to do in startups, right? So there's not a lot of that. And then Louisville, while I think Louisville's a very creative city, I think there's not a big enough, or at least there wasn't when I was there, a big enough group of people that have deep technical, obsessive technical depth, right? So we were an early, those of you that are technical know that Backupify was a very early user of Cassandra, which is a NoSQL database. And in 2008, 2009, when we started building this, there were very few people anywhere that had worked with NoSQL databases, right? Because, SQL is the query language that they used for the first 30 years of, the history of databases. And so to find the kind of people that worked with it or wanted to work with it, those people, there were a few people in Louisville, right? So Eric Alexander, who's now in Boston as the CTO of a company, was a guy who was playing with that on the side. But like when you come to a big hub where there's a lot of tech, you have these weirdos who this is what they spend their nights and weekends doing, is playing around with the new technology because they love it. And they're fun, interesting people to hang around with. But when you look at a place like Louisville, like these weirdos don't have work-life balance, right? They don't care as much about dating. They don't care as much about family. They don't care as much about the restaurant scene. It's like what they want to do is they want to get together over drinks and like argue about like, man, I went to some of these things in New York in 2016 and 2017 when Bitcoin was early. And like, you're just hearing these people like at like what's sort of a party talk like deeply about arguing about Bitcoin protocols. And it's like, and don't get me wrong, like to build a big company, you need a lot of normal people as well. But you need this core of people that are obsessed with the new technology and stuff like that. And, look, I know a few of those people in Louisville, but I think you need a bigger, as some of you guys might know, like the guys like Mike Lutz, right? Who's a programmer, always exploring the new kinds of things. But you need, I think, a bigger, you need a decent community of those people to really go and embrace those things. And so there was just a lot of things that, that Louisville was lacking. And it's part of the reason that, it's part of the reason that it's easy to get things started there because you can find a couple of like really good forward thinking engineers, but you can't necessarily get that critical mass.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Taylor, same question to you. And then I'm going to start diving into particular questions. I see a couple of really good ones coming up in the chat.
Oh, can you reframe the question?
So for those folks that are participants that don't know why Blackstone went to New York City, do you mind just briefly saying how Blackstone ended up in New York and why you're not here now, starting your next venture?
Yes. So I think I have a different reason than the other two guys. I moved here for personal reasons. I moved here because I didn't move my business here. My company remained based in Louisville and headquartered in Louisville until I sold it in 2018 to a Boston firm. Uh, it was very difficult for Blackstone to do business in New York City. I mean, some of the best advertising agencies in the world are based here. And price isn't the motivator I thought it would be. People are spending money here, and so if you're 30% cheaper, it's not a reason to go with someone else that they feel is inferior. So while we did have some business here, 95% of my business was in the Midwest in my last company, and pretty much all my employees were down there. But I moved here because, for a lot of the same reasons that Rob just said, I moved here because I was inspired every time I came here, and I would go to these 10-person dinners, and 7 of the people there were outrageously interesting. And they weren't interesting because they had a big ego. They were interesting because they had cool stories to tell, and because they were super nerdy about certain things. And that nerdiness isn't just in things like Bitcoin. And while that is a lot of it, when us as tech people think about engineering, that same nerdiness applies to people that are obsessed with nonprofits, and they're obsessed with the media industry, and they're obsessed with advertising, and they're obsessed, they have an obsessive personality around specific things. And that, I consider myself a lifelong learner as somebody who loves this type of stuff. I want to meet an engineer that loves, dental, products or cars or any of these things. I'll talk to any of them as long as they're interesting and really nerdy in those ways. And the reason I moved here was because every event that I went to had those people, to Rob's point, in all these different spaces, just really interesting, obsessive people. Now, some of them were also jerks and, all this other stuff. But by and large, kind of all the events that I went to were just mind blowing, and I learned.
Yeah. So we just need to grow a whole bunch of a higher density of weirdos and nerds, and we're good. I think one of sorry, go ahead, Rob.
You also have to grow. The ecosystem has to remain balanced, right? And I think that's what's hard. Is I think people are always looking for, like, what's the answer? You can't just be like, hey, let's get a bunch more capital, because if you suddenly had, triple the amount of capital that was available in Louisville in a year, what would happen is, like, more marginal ideas would get funded, they wouldn't work out, and then people would go, well, that was stupid, and then you wouldn't get to perpetuate the capital. And if you just really grew and exploded the amount of entrepreneurs in a year with, like, great ideas, like, there wouldn't be enough capital, some of them would move out, and these kinds of things, right? And so when you think about how to grow an ecosystem, it's very different than how you would grow something that's more linear. And so you have to grow all these parts equally. You have to grow the weirdos, you have to grow the capital, you have to grow the types of managers that can work with, I was very lucky. I mean, people don't realize, like, I was 31, when I started Backupify. There was a lot of things that I did not know. And I had a lot of mentors, and they were, in Boston, there are people who, like, kind of have made their career in, like, I'm a senior executive, I'm a, like, Harvard MBA, McKinsey kind of person, but I can work with somebody 20 years younger than me and realize that we're going to disagree sometimes, even though I'm way smarter than them. And I'm going to say, okay, you're the founder, right? Mm-hmm. So you need all these different types of people, and you have to grow them in roughly equal proportions to, to make it work.
So I love that you're bringing it up like that, because in a call that I had this morning for a different, it was a Louisville question nonetheless, but I was representing the business aspect of it. One of the things that got brought up is that Louisville has a PR problem. Like, outside of the protests and all that stuff, our Louisville business community, we have a PR problem, right? We're right now talking about all the reasons why Louisville has people that have left and what we're lacking and missing and all that stuff. So how do we bring these more interesting outsiders to Louisville? Because I think that once people get here or have visited here, they realize that Louisville is a wonderful place to be and full of vibrancy and all that stuff. How do we, especially in this day and age, start bringing these eccentric other people into Louisville and exposing them? Kind of like you think about when we got ComputerShare here, right? ComputerShare, we brought all their people in, they love the cost of living, and they ultimately decided to stay here. I think Louisville has this, like, attraction piece. If we get them here, and maybe they weren't born and raised here, they want to stay. Alex, I see you chomping at the bit to tell me.
A couple things to just loft into the conversation. First is what Taylor just described is exactly right about New York City. It's the place to go to meet an exceptional, world-class anything, and everything in the world exists in New York. And Louisville does have a couple answers to that same question, but it shouldn't aspire to be New York. It's never going to happen, right? What I can
Sure.
tell you very confidently about the brand identity piece of the puzzle is that this exists in a lot of places, including in Columbus. It is the number one problem that people in Columbus in discussions like this often cite, which is that Columbus does not have an identity. We need more brand awareness because it's the capital of a pretty populous state and has a large university and a growing tech scene. Well, you know what else that describes? Austin, Texas. Capital of a populous state, large university, growing tech scene. One of them, though, is growing exorbitantly quickly, especially with COVID. VCs and other large tech personalities, including Elon Musk this week, are moving to that city in order to live there and operate there. And that's not happening in Ohio. So why not? This is a meaningfully difficult problem. I think Louisville actually has a very unique opportunity here because it does have much more of a head start in its unique identity as a city and as a place. And that's everything from the superficial horse racing and bourbon all the way down to just get on a plane and come here and hang out for a weekend and you'll kind of see and catch the vibe that is unique for other middle American cities. And so it's a real opportunity. That opportunity has accelerated. I saw a question in the chat that indicates this as well. There is a huge dispersion happening where the trickle of, well, I guess you don't really need to be based in San Francisco to build $1 billion company. That's been happening. This year has made that emphatically true. Now, all of a sudden, if we're just going to get together on Zoom meetings anyway, who cares where you live? Who cares where you're based? Who cares where your company's headquartered? And so now we have the opportunity as the Louisville ecosystem to take advantage of that dispersion to places that otherwise would not be getting the shine, the attention, the brand cachet that has been classically reserved for the big coastal cities. How Louisville takes advantage of that is complex because, to Rob's point, it's not just going to be one thing. You can't just meaningfully accelerate capital or engineering degrees per capita or number of founders starting companies. They can't be asymmetrical to one another. Those things have to be a positive feedback loop that is in and of its essence an ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. And to that, with the Zoom culture and what's going on right now, everyone says, oh, well, now more than ever, you can attract national, people from VC firms in Silicon Valley. You can get them to hop on Zoom calls and all that stuff. I actually want to know, how do we do that though? Because we just did the Venture Sharks pitch competition and we got one woman from Two Bear Capital in Silicon Valley because of a friend of a friend. It wasn't because she knew anything about Louisville. It wasn't because she was interested in Venture Sharks competition, that's for sure. But how do we actually get these bigger name talents without the capital, right? The Rise of the Rest people came, but because PNC Bank pledged to fund some of that. How do we get that? Taylor, I saw you turn your mic off.
Oh, I think it's the exact way you got that one. It's by knowing people and you pull in favors. But by the way, that the same is true here. I put on events here in New York. It works exactly the same. It's just that it's easier for me to talk to those people. But it's all relationships. I think that to me, New York and Boston, I can only really speak for New York, but New York feels like it is a large city. But in these circles, the reputation is just like Louisville. It's the same principles applied, just way more people. And so the exact thing that you explained is how I get speakers here in New York. I know somebody who knows somebody. I ask them to pull in a favor, and then that's what happens. At least that's my experience.
Yeah, I would sort of echo that. Like one of the mistakes that I think a lot of the Louisville startup community made back when I was there was they thought the idea was to be very insular, right? And just focus on Louisville. And so they would encourage angel investors, like, don't invest outside of Louisville. They would encourage startup founders not to worry about pitching, people outside of Louisville and all that kind of stuff. And, if you think about the world moving towards more networks and if you're a sort of network theory person and you read a lot of I don't know if you guys have read like the 7 Cents or like, any of the Linked or whatever, like the Science of Networks or some of these books, but it's like, the idea is to deeply connect yourself with the other nodes, right? And so a lot of the people, I mean, a lot of people I know in Boston were from Louisville connections. They were people that when I moved up here, it's like, you know, Louisville guys like Vic Chadha and Sterling Lipinski and, you know, people who had sort of been around introduced me to people in Boston, right? And so there's a lot of that. And it is, you know, I think the Louisville community would do a better job of like really trying to invest in other places, build connections with other places, and have a more free-flowing back and forth of ideas. Are you going to lose some companies that start in Louisville and move other places? Yes. But I think you could build a brand where instead of trying to compete with Silicon Valley, for example, you could really carve out a target market of, hey, companies like this are really great to build here, right? Whether it's an industry type of thing, or maybe it could even be a style of company, right? You know, you're seeing a lot of, to give you an example, there's a trend now in tech startups for like, you know, there's, as SaaS is getting more and more, you know, down the curve of things that have been SaaSified and things that haven't, you're starting to see these SaaS companies that get stuck around a couple million in revenue, and they're only going to grow 10 to 20% year over year from that point. And they could probably toggle a little bit and get to cash flow break even, but they're not able to raise growth rounds. And so what happens now is they get subsumed into bigger companies. But like, you could make a whole market of like, hey, those companies should relocate here with a low cost of living. They make it easy, or, you know, at least core operations. And, you know, maybe we have investors that like that kind of profile of something, slower growth, but less risk. And, you know, there's a lot of ways to play it, but I think a lot of it is to Taylor's point and Fro's point, like, you just have to build these people. You just have to build these connections, you know, with people no matter where they are, and keep kind of inching up the ladder of the quality of people that you know and what they've done.
When we let folks know that we were moving the company to Columbus, this is 2014, there were really two types of reactions I got. And it's exactly what you just described, Rob. There was a group of people who are like, oh man, we're losing something as an ecosystem. The other response was, and so that was, you know, one of, let's call it disappointment. The other response was, great, now there's another person who's going to be out there building connections that you better bring back to help other people in Louisville. So the next founder, the next one up, should hopefully benefit from the node that is now going to be in Ohio, or that node that goes to another VC firm. And that's exactly how we've been able to, exactly how I've been able to advise and help founders that are based in Louisville. Allie and Jennifer Williams came up to Columbus, what was that, like 3 months ago, Allie?
Oh my gosh, it was so fun. Yes, in the middle of COVID, and we still got a ton of work done.
Yep, and we, you know, made some introductions from our network, stayed with us. Like that was, and it was super fun and easy. And that's the node. And this is happening, I know, Taylor, with you and Rob in Boston and New York. That's actually still very positive. Zach Pennington's down in Austin. Now we've got a node in Austin. These are good things, and, you know, looking for opportunities to continue to densify both what's happening in Louisville and then the nodes that we have. And the networks resulting from them, it's all helpful. It's all additive to the ecosystem.
Yeah, and I would add to that, people need to know, I think particularly people that don't live in one of these hubs where there's a whole lot of, you know, who do you know and how can you get to people? You know, you also need to make sure that you use the network appropriately and sort of fairly. Like, I'm very good friends with Jason Kalkanis. Like, I stayed at his house, our kids have played together and stuff like that. I get asked for intros to him all the time, which I don't mind making, right? But I don't like, you know, some random person comes up to me at like a Louisville event who's just getting started with their company, and it's them and one other person, and their idea is mediocre, and they don't have anything in their background to say that they've been successful, and they want to meet Jason. And it's kind of like, well, you know, like, jump through a little bit of hoops, right? And like, show that you've done some stuff, and you're more likely to do that, or at least understand that, like, I'm not just gonna like give you a cell phone number. Like, at a minimum, you want to, you know, you want to double opt-in or whatever, right? And so you have to think about, like, I love the fact that, like, you know, Alex knows the Drive Capital guys, right? It's like, okay, everybody that knows Alex now has a connection to Drive Capital, but you can't just use it to be like, hey, what do you think about my idea? Like, when you ask for those kinds of introductions and when you work these networks, you need to have a good reason. You need to be able to offer value on both sides. You need to be able to reciprocate. And you don't want to make the middle points in the network look stupid, right? You don't want Alex to, if Alex introduces a bunch of, like, you know, half-wits to Drive Capital, like, that makes Alex look bad, right? So, like, you don't want to, you know, you don't want to ask people to do that. You want to, you know, you want to have good stories. You want to have your act together when you ask for these things.
Rob, there's what you just spoke to is a bit of a education gap, because some of it's, some of those introduction asks or network leveraging is driven by true ignorance, meaning that, or maybe not knowing if you're ready to have that conversation with that person or not. And you're investing, so you're meeting companies in their earlier stages and spending time with them. Any advice for how an early stage, like let's say a seed stage or even pre-seed business, should think about how to leverage that network, and what's the right way to go to you to be able to build the credibility that would be needed for your network to open up to them?
The biggest thing, we look at so many businesses and so many entrepreneurs, and the biggest single thing that I look for in the early days is there anything that stands out and makes you different, right? It doesn't matter what it is, but like, Taylor talked about the obsessives earlier, like people that are obsessive about something, whatever it is, people that are trying stuff, like I don't put a lot of weight on whether or not people have failed at things. I mean, God, some of you guys who remember me from when I was in Louisville, like I have this whole like string of failed business ideas and everything else, right? And anybody who's built it, a decent sized company, like I'm sure these guys can tell you, you have a lot of days you think you're not going to make it. You have a lot of like near-death experiences. But you just have people that have fought to do a successful company. You have to have some non-standard way of looking at the world. And so that's what I'm always looking for. And sometimes it's just like that you love your work and you work harder. Sometimes you're obsessive about a certain thing. Sometimes you're just, you like to like just talk and write. Like I was a big writer. I was an early blogger. And I think that a lot of the early people that I met in Louisville were drawn to that because they're like, wow, Rob's just out like writing stuff and doing stuff. And like not a lot of people want to spend, I used to just get up in the morning and blog first thing in the morning. I would get up an hour early so I could write. And so I always encourage people, like, start a newsletter, do a thing, start a side company. Like, it doesn't matter if it works out, but if you can just do any, show some ordinance of original thought or extra work ethic or whatever, that's really the thing that I think we all look for, when we hire, when we make introductions, and in the relationships that we try to build sometimes, when you get in these tech startup circles.
Absolutely. It's like building your life resume outside of your job resume. Jesse Setzler, I think, is the husband of Sarah Blakely, the Spanx lady. And he has like this whole other side hustle. And he's like, do something that makes you more interesting. It's going to benefit not only you as a person, but it's going to benefit your business. And you're going to build your life resume and you're going to be more interesting. So we have a lot of questions in the chat. I want to make sure I get to some of them while we're on the capital piece. I think Zach had a really nice question about, can you talk about the differences in risk profile and perceived risk and the small town issues? Because I think this goes back to anybody that's lived in Louisville. I'm from St. Louis and I came here to go to college, and everyone said, this is the biggest high school you're ever going to be in. And it's like that high school small town mentality. Are we at a disadvantage when we go talk to investors in other cities because we have this small town mentality? And do they think that we're small potatoes and can't think largely when we go and pitch ourselves to them? Taylor's giggling. Taylor,
well,
yes.
So we raised some money last year, and we're raising more money next year. And I was talking to a Louisville investor yesterday, actually, because he texted me. I've known him for years, and he might be on this call, but he texted me and he's like, hey, can I look at your deck? So we go back and forth, introducing my co-founder who's really running all the investment side. And finally, this guy was just like, hey, your valuation's too high. He wrote back this whole response. And keep in mind, like, all my investors are in New York. Like, he'd be the only one that's from, and I was like, this is exactly why I left. Like this mentality of, it just, yeah,
it's pervasive.
It is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think it's meaningfully difficult to fund big ideas, period. I think that this is, there are very few places, and why Silicon Valley is so iconic globally is it was for a long time, even compared to New York, where venture capital actually started and where all of the capital was heavily concentrated, even it needed innovation in mindset and culture, which is what started the way we think of modern venture capital decades ago still, so this is like the 60s and 70s, but decades ago, it was even a problem that New York sized checks were not culturally ready to go after true venture, things that could and will go to zero, literal $0 returns on a large percentage of the investments made. And that required a big revolution in how to think about the value of capital, how to price it, how to put it into businesses, and the idea of power law returns, meaning that in a portfolio, many things will go to zero, but the winners are not just home runs, they are multi-time grand slams that will earn 100 or 1000x returns, and that makes up for all the other losses and then some. And so that's the entire asset class of venture capital as we see it today. But worth pointing out that nowhere in the history of the globe and the history of capitalism was this culturally accepted until the relatively recent past. And even then it was only in very specifically one place in the world, being Silicon Valley. And only in the past 15 or 20 years has that capital base as an asset class even expanded meaningfully beyond San Francisco. And now it's in a few more places, but it's not everywhere yet. And so what that means is, as Taylor continues to try to raise from a Louisville-based investor or a Des Moines-based investor, he's going to hear a lot of valuation constraint issues. Rob is highly specialized in artificial intelligence. That's a unique skill set, because any other investor that hears a great AI pitch is going to have no idea how to evaluate the technical risk associated with it, and is unlikely to be able to cut a check with confidence into that business, where Rob has an advantage there. So this is meaningfully difficult. There's a certain type of company that I think does get invested in Louisville. It's probably not the biggest technical risk businesses. I can't imagine biotech taking off meaningfully, or DNA sequencing taking off meaningfully, or digital currencies taking off meaningfully in Louisville because of the domain experience needed there. But we can do a better job as a Louisville ecosystem, bringing the capital that is available, that is increasingly interested in looking at underserved venture markets, and inviting that capital to look at what is here, because there are some incredibly compelling businesses in the direct-to-consumer space, in restaurants, which is a very unique piece of Louisville's industrial DNA, logistics. There are some really exciting companies being built here.
So I think that was a fantastic point, Fro. I'm hearing like we should just own what we are, what we have, right? So our best assets are those 5 or 6 categories, some advanced manufacturing. So we have got Fort Knox is in our backyard, some government contracting, and Handle began here, government contracting opportunities, the restaurant and the bourbonism and the tourism and horse racing. I think that's a fantastic idea. So one of the questions that was on the sheets, but I think we're all dying to know is, so does Louisville start a VC fund, and who's in charge of that? Because Chrysalis, it was very specific about who they invested in, education and healthcare. Obviously they're no longer a part of the investment ecosystem anymore. Is Louisville supposed to start a fund now, and who's in charge of that? And how do we educate the community at large what that looks like? Rob, maybe this is to you. I don't know.
Yeah.
And feel free to speak freely. Maybe we're not ready. Maybe we're way too young.
So I think the problem is, I think the way to do it successfully is also very risky, right? So if the mayor called me and said, hey, I want you to help raise a $50 million, $100 million fund, run it out of Louisville, and it's really focused on investing in or to make Louisville better. Say that was the general thing. The way I would do it is I would try to pick some kind of super targeted expertise, right? Like just even more narrow than most targeted venture funds would go. There's a lot that do like fintech, like I would do crypto, right? Or I would do, sub down from there, maybe even smart contracts, right? And the reason I would do that is because if you, which actually, let me just say, that's not what I would pick, because I think the smart contract thing is a little ways off. And that
Illustrative only.
Yeah. So the risk of this, right? Which is, let's say you pick like AR, right? We're going to go deep on augmented reality, and this is going to be the place. And then it turns out augmented reality is still like, you don't know, maybe it's still 25 years away, and then you struggle. But what you have to do, and you can't pick something that's on, you can't be like, we're going to do B2B SaaS. You're like, okay, you have no advantage there. You know, you need to pick something that's right on the cusp, and you have to hope that you guess right enough that you build the brand for what that stands for. And then what can happen is you fund companies around the world that are doing it, but a lot of them are drawn to you because you're the hub, right? When you're the person where you're like, I know, like here's something Louisville could do. So I'm an investor in a company called Root AI. They build robots for indoor farms. One of the largest indoor farms that's one of their customers is in Eastern Kentucky, right? So when I come back at Christmas, I'm going to go over and see them and everything else. And it's like that thing, like to say like farming robotics, that could be kind of a thing where like Kentucky could own that, right? It's got a good climate. You can grow lots of different stuff. There's lots of different farms around. It's, you've got the manufacturing side where it's cheap to get warehouse space and build the robots and do stuff. You can ship everywhere in the world. So like, I would raise a fund and I would pick something like that to just own and become a hub. And once you become a hub, like that's the key. You have to become a hub for something, right? You don't want to be a scaled down version of Silicon Valley. You want to be a hub for your own thing, and hope that your own thing just, is the right thing, that it grows. You're a little bit at mercy of how that industry grows, but at least you can own it, right? And that's basic like Michael Porter competitive advantage theory, right? Which is pound on your differentiators.
We have an investor that's based in St. Louis, and they have a whole dedicated agriculture vehicle because St. Louis is home to many of the big ag companies who are LPs in the fund as well. And because there's a density of talent that on the food science side and on just agriculture know-how, they've built these businesses before, and it's very successful as a result.
So this begs the question, who's in charge of that? What we've got going on in Louisville is we've got 15 different entrepreneur groups, and everybody wants to own, and I'm a part of probably all 15 of them, right? And I'm probably on the board of 6 of them. And we're all trying to own a different piece. Is it Mayor Fisher that says we need a fund? Is it Amplify that says we're starting a fund, we're tired of this? Is it GLI, our Chamber of Commerce, that says, okay, we've got to get these key stakeholders together? Or is it Mikey on the side of Amplify, or Mikey, whatever, Joe Schmo starts a fund? Like, I think that's one of the biggest problems we have, or we're talking a lot of problems. One of the biggest problems we have is everybody's got all these ideas and nobody wants to do it. I would love to see that change, but I want to run Wicked Sheets until I sell it for $50 million, right? I would love to be the beneficiary of all this data that we can provide and these investors, but am I going to have to also go and do it? And Sean O'Leary always says there's this Thudwick syndrome, and Louisville has it. We are mooses, whatever, and we are carrying everything. And there are the 35 people that are on this call, and we're weighted down to the point where eventually if I take on too much, Wicked Sheets is going to fail, and the 15 other things that I'm doing are going to fail. Taylor?
Can I throw out something very practical? Put $100,000 into taking people in Louisville, like yourself, Allie, others in Louisville who have a thirst for learning, and then you ship them to places like Columbus, Ohio. You have them go see Rob up in Boston. I'll be happy to host them here. I've hosted a number of groups here in New York. I'm certain that the Louisville community, that you take them down to Austin to see Zach, I'm certain that the Louisville community who has left would be more than happy to host some of these people, and you bring them in, because I'm a big believer in modeling. We become what we are around. And if Louisville people just hang out with Louisville people, this isn't going to fix it. The way to fix it is to go hang out with people who have this inspiration, who have these new stories to tell, who have connections to new people, who have, and it's inspiring, at least for me, to be in these dinners and to be in these rooms with people. I mean, it's absolutely inspiring. The reason I would not leave New York is because 2 of my closest friends are in tech. One of them just sold his company for $30 million. Rob actually met him here when he was here for his birthday last year. He just sold his money. He's younger than me, and he's one of my closest friends. And that would have never happened in Louisville, partly because I didn't know those people. Like I didn't know anybody my age who was doing stuff like that. Now they're my closest friends. And what I'm saying, the reason I say that is because when friends come from Louisville up here, they meet those same people and they're like, oh, wow, that's incredible. You know, it's inspiring to be around those people on just as a friendly basis, not like to see them on a stage, but just hang out with them. And that's inspiring, at least for somebody like me. And I would say that that's kind of a two-way street, but it's easier to kind of take that 100 grand, 200 grand, whatever it is, and shuttle people around for 2, 3, 4 days post COVID probably. But
So that's the fund for node building, taking Louisville externally. The same thing could be helpful in reverse, which is bringing capital and talented, experienced executives into Louisville, meet companies, build connections, and have that connective tissue being built out. Part of this was being done by the mayor's office. And I don't know if that's an initiative that's continued, but leveraging a global event we have here every year in the Kentucky Derby is a really convenient way where people already want to come check out Louisville for one weekend a year at least, to have essentially an opportunity. And it's not just the Steve Case comes in town to do the Rise of Rust tour type thing, but it's let's go get partners at venture capital funds, seed capital funds to come visit Louisville and do it with an agenda to meet the businesses that are here and get to know them. That won't mean everybody leaves with a check in hand, but it will mean that more folks have Louisville on their radar and meaningful connections with the founders that are here and the companies that are being built here as well. And it's not that expensive. It's the cost of the plane tickets and the hotel rooms at the end of the day.
So I want to get to 2 or 3 other things on here. Sorry. I'm getting text questions on my watch, questions on my phone, questions on my computer. I definitely want to talk about universities a little bit, because there are lots of other cities, you know, obviously MIT, Harvard, that are fostering the talent pool, right? They're putting people out in the talent pool. What's the conversation we need to have with University of Louisville, University of Kentucky, Bellarmine, Spalding, all that stuff? Do they need to be are they an imperative part of this story that Louisville's building right now? Is it just that they're producing more talent, that they offer more degree programs? I mean, is that maybe not even a part of the conversation? If not, no big deal.
I mean, I think part of it, you know, one of the things that gets overlooked in Boston is actually Northeastern has a really good program because they require you to do a co-op if you're an engineering student there. And so these people are applying to work for free at all kinds of startups, because that's where, you know, if you're in college and you're an engineering major, like that's where you want to go. And so they have really good relationships with industry to get people real job experience. And so some of that helps. There's things Louisville doesn't lean on. Like a lot of people don't realize, like one of the top 1 or 2 guys in the world in AI safety and security is a guy named Roman Yampoliski. He's a professor at University of Louisville, right? And it's like, how can you not leverage that? And how can the city not help and the university not promote him and, you know, build a small conference around him and do some of that stuff? So there's a place for it, but I mean, I also, the big university, it's also part of the mandate. I would distinguish Harvard and MIT, like being up here. Like MIT is really about tech innovation. It's like what they live and breathe and think about. Harvard maybe less so, but you know, I went to University of Kentucky. It's got a good solid engineering program, but it's not, the university has a lot of other things that they care about. So.
Well, Rob just touched on is quality of talent. There's also the quantity argument as well. And so the comp in Columbus is, setting aside the other universities based in Columbus, just take Ohio State, just zoom in on their computer science program. It throws off more bachelor's in computer science degrees every year than the entire speed school combined. That's just computer science. So you're talking about 22-ish year old computer science grads eager to get their first job somewhere, being thrown off in the quantum of 400 to 600 people per year into a relatively small city being Columbus. Getting that talent to your startup is a layup here because there's not that many other companies competing for it. And just the quantum of people spit out every year that are churning into Columbus from Ohio State, the machine of Ohio State, is is just really meaningful. And you can tell the difference there when the entirety of Speed School across all the engineering degree programs is going to not be appropriate for most startups and what they're trying to achieve. The computer science department alone at Ohio State provides a competitive advantage for Columbus area companies.
Mhm. So we've got 5 minutes left. I want to take the last 5 minutes and ask the question. Britton actually said it so eloquently. What can we do to not be having the same conversation in 5 years, Louisville? So I believe in action items, and I don't believe in like spouting off 100,000 of them. Can each of you give 1 to 2 things that we can do today or in the next couple of months that are going to help us advance this conversation?
You can start.
Yeah, Taylor, please.
I would create a founders only program. It's a dinner series in Louisville, and I would have it that it's no service people are allowed in, no people who aspire to be a founder, none of that. You're only allowed in if you're a founder. I would put a revenue threshold minimum on it. Doesn't have to be high, but they had to be a founder who's either raised money or is has a revenue threshold. I'm part of one of these groups. I'm part of Entrepreneurs Organization, which I've talked about on these calls with Louisville people before. I'm a big believer. I'm on the board of EO New York. It's a global organization. So that could be it. You could just open a Louisville chapter of EO. And then the second thing is what I hit on before. It's this, how do we create, EO used to have a chapter in Louisville. I joined EO Cincinnati. When I joined EO, I was in Louisville. I had to join the one at Cincinnati in order to be a member. Huge believer in that. I mentioned modeling earlier. I'm just such a believer in being around the people that we want to become. And the way to do that is to get these people together. Louisville has some of them, by the way. To Rob's point, there are these people in Louisville. But they, they're either hard to access or like they don't, it's just like hard to get them together, or they would show up to the same event I'd be in, but there'd be 26 other people there. And I only want to talk to one person here. So how do we create like small, intimate events just for those people?
It's great.
When Amelia was at GLI, she invented a concept called the $1 Million Baby. And it was either a company with $1 million in revenue, a startup with $1 million in revenue, like lifetime or aggregate revenue, so it could still be a pretty early stage business, or has raised $1 million or more in funding. And so that was kind of the demarcation of then a metric to track, but that could be the price of entry into the founder dinner, or you can even cut it. I'm part of a couple groups in Columbus that are like this, where you cut it by stage of founder. So there's a few of us that are growth stage founders. We all get together as a group, and we even are exclusive from earlier stage founders because it's a different set of issues that you're trying to tactically solve. And so it opens up the most honest and vulnerable of discussions when you're with kind of the same stage as well. So as it densifies, you can go in that direction. The one thing I would throw onto the pile is I've been really passionate about lobbying the Speed School in any number of ways possible to just increase the size of the school, in particular the computer science and engineering program. That's really the engine of the 21st century economy, the digital economy. And frankly, I think Louisville would serve itself well by just having more of those degrees being built in Louisville. And many of those people, they might already be in Louisville. In many cases, they're going to be attracted from other parts of the state, other parts of the region. So setting up the scholarship programs, increasing the size of those freshman classes compounds year on year, and over the next, not 5 years probably, but over the next decade plus, you'll start to see more availability of young, ambitious talent that is degreed specifically and credentialed specifically to be able to build the products that many of our ideas as founders are going to necessitate. That would be my idea.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So I would suggest that, I would build on some of the ideas that these guys have suggested, not just, right now, but also, during the call, that I think finding ways to build connections to other places, even if the people are going to be based in Louisville, would be important. I mean, Taylor referenced last year for my birthday, I went down to New York, and Taylor came to I had a drinks thing, and then I had a dinners thing with a bunch of people, and I was mixing people who should know each other. The former head of the Harvard Natural Language Processing Lab was one of the guys that came to the thing, right? And Taylor and some other people, and it's like mixing those people. I mean, it's a lot of times, you never talk to anybody again and you don't have a connection or whatever. But if one out of every few dozen that you meet, you have a connection, you have a reason to be connected and work together someday or have expertise, it's important. And so I think being able to overlay programs where you had, if you have this entrepreneur group, right? Or if you have, to Fro's point, like more students coming out that are computer science that are interested in startups, and you can get those people together initially, and you can also invite that whole group, like, I mean, if somebody called me and they said, hey, we're bringing, 8 entrepreneurs to Boston for 2 days, would you put together a dinner one night and invite 3 other interesting people to join the group, and we'll have, 11 or 12 people? Like, yeah, I totally do that. Right. If it would fit in my schedule, and then they have connections, maybe nothing comes of it, but if you keep doing that, something eventually does. And so, if you have a bunch of kids coming out of speed school, and university or the city would sponsor, like, to have them, come up to Boston, go to New York, go to Silicon Valley for a couple of days, go to all 3, right? And then come back and take, what they've learned and what they've seen and that enthusiasm, and bring it to the Louisville startups that they're going to work for startups in the region. Like, those things can really matter. Like, just being able to have somebody that that you can ping with a question of, like, hey, I'm having this technical issue, or how would you approach this? Like, that's really, really valuable. Like, a lot of times, if you don't have those connections, you just don't know where to start.
Mm-hmm. I think
One thing we can all agree on, though, is that we need a statue erected to Vic Chadha somewhere in Louisville.
Yes, I think
It's
we all
non-negotiable.
absolutely agree with that for sure. He's amazing. I like this idea of, like, the exporting, and something that Chris Red had just posted, the importing piece of it as well, getting people to come to events like Network and Chill. Jennifer Williams and I are a part of an e-commerce group, having folks from out of town that are in e-commerce come in and then host them. I know the Render and Access Capital group, they had some of their winners relocate to Louisville. They don't have to stay there. They don't have to stay here forever, but Jen suggested we should be ambassadors. So now I'm meeting with, a winner from Chicago and showing him around. She's meeting with a guy from Japan and showing him around. And I'm sorry. No, I do not. Sorry guys. Real life. I've already met with mine twice, Jen says. So importing and exporting and making those nodes grow, and curating those connections has just been absolutely crucial. And I think we need to continue doing that. I'm going to hand it back over to Mikey. I absolutely loved being a part of this. I hope I got to most of the questions. I tried to condense some of them. I apologize if I did not get to all of them, but Taylor, Rob, Alex, it's been a pleasure as always. I just love you guys. I will be on your couches sometime in the near future. Mikey.
Thanks, Allie.
I think a lot of great ideas have come out of this, and a lot of things that, this isn't something we can get done in a year. I think this is continuing along with the plan for the 5 and 10-year plan, but there are some action items that we can start right now. So thank you so much, Alex, Taylor, Rob, for joining this conversation. We made this one an hour versus an hour and a half, and I wish I would have switched it back. But this is a recurring conversation we need to have probably. So thank you so much for joining us. If everyone that in the attendee side that liked this session want to see more, please subscribe to the amplifylouisville.com. It's our newsletter where we showcase events like this, the news going on in the ecosystem, as well as the events or the wins that we like to celebrate. But you know what, maybe we need this to be a quarterly or even a yearly conversation. So thank you all for joining us. If you heard something that you really think that you could be a part of and help to make the changes you heard, please let us know. Obviously the moose,
I know,
moose eye. What is that plural? There are people that are in the community that have the startups they're working on themselves, and maybe they feel overloaded and they can't do it all. So everyone, it's like stone soup. Everyone's got to play their part, right? So find out what that part is that you can help to play. Whether maybe when we bring in some Taylor or Rob next time, maybe your part is you offer your spare bedroom or couch or whatever. But find out what that role is. But respectful of time. Thank you so much, everybody. Taylor, Alex, Rob again, Allie, wonderful job as usual. Have a great rest of your day and weekend, and happy holidays, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Holidays.
Stay healthy.
Thank you.
See you guys.